We are in the middle of a sermon series called Hope and Holiness, which we're walking through the book of First Peter. Today we're going to be in First Peter 3:13 through 4:6, and again, we're taking some pretty sizable chunks of text and going through them kind of quickly. It's a lot of good stuff. It's a lot of stuff. I would encourage you outside of church setting to be studying and reading and looking at this, because there's so much in here. The Apostle Peter is writing this, the Apostle of Jesus, one of Jesus's closest friends during his ministry time. Peter was one of his inner circle, one of his three closest, and so the Apostle Peter is writing this to Christians who are dispersed in an area known as Asia Minor. It's now modern-day Turkey. And so these Christians are in these areas under authority of the Roman Empire. And so the Roman Emperor Nero is in charge of these areas and over these areas. And Nero, we talked about this previously, Nero has persecuted Christians harshly, severely. He detests Christians and his, the things that he would do to people because of their professed faith in Christianity were awful, heinous things that he would do. Almost, I don't know, it almost kind of seems as if it was almost for his enjoyment to an extent, but I think ultimately it was for his feeling of power and to get power. And so these are the people, I think, keeping that in mind, trying to imagine the setting that these Christians are in, the life that they are living, the authorities over them, that what they are going through. Peter is writing this letter to them. We read this now, in our context, and we think about, the world that we live in, and it's difficult. There's challenges. There's things we don't like. I feel pretty confident. I know me personally, I have never at any point been persecuted as a Christian for my faith remotely like these Christians are being persecuted at this time. And so Peter's writing this letter to them. And I think about Christians reading this letter in the first century under Nero and how they would respond and want to live. And I'm like, man, if they're reading it, and they're feeling called, because it's God, it's the Holy Spirit speaking through Peter to them to live out this. And Peter is trying to encourage them with two important things laced throughout this letter. Like, you are called to a living hope. You have hope. And we're going to spend some time talking about that a little bit today. But that hope is in Jesus. You have this, and it's alive, and it's well. And so be encouraged because you have that hope. Don't lose that hope. And this hope isn't hope like a word of gee, we hope this happens, maybe it will work out. No, this is a fact. This is a promise from God. This is a guarantee that you have. You are living it now, but it is also a hope, a promise to come, but it will happen. That's the hope that you have. And he also calls them then, because of this hope, to live a life of holiness, to live set apart. They have been, as Christians, we have been set apart for God. We're not to look like this world. And I think a lot of times craziness of the world around us. It's a crazy world. There's lots of things going on. There's challenges for us, challenges to our belief. I wouldn't call it necessarily, thank you, my wife, I tell you, I wouldn't call it necessarily persecution, so to speak, but man, there are challenges to our faith, and there are things in the world around us that don't align with our faith, and we look at it and we think, man, that's not right. And so we try to live set apart from that world. I decided to go through First Peter in part because this time of year, we have an election coming up here in the United States, and it's an important time. And I know that for some of us, it's a little bit, it makes us anxious. It makes us nervous. We're not really sure what's going to happen. There's going to be a vote at some point, and we're going to have a new leader of our country, and we don't know We don't know how we feel about that necessarily, regardless of who wins. I think some of us have challenges. I don't like politics. I don't like politics at all. I very much dislike politics, to be honest with you, because I think it brings out a lot of brings out anxiety. It brings out angst. It brings out anger. It brings out frustration. It brings out lots of things because we are a very, very divided country. We're a very divided people. And I think part of that is we have to remember that not everybody believes in Jesus. Not everybody lives their life for Jesus. And they live their life, some people live their life for whatever else it might be, but not Jesus. And that makes them very different in how they view things. And so I know we can get heated up when we have certain conversations. We're going to talk about being prepared, and I think I've found like being prepared in advance of political conversations is helpful to having those political conversations. I think, one of the things that really, fires me up is when some Chiefs fan, come on, the Chiefs and the 49ers are playing today. And, I'm going to have a conversation with somebody about who the best tight end in the NFL is. Clearly, Kittle. Right? I know. Like some of you like, wait a sec, he's not serious, is he? I might be. Sometimes we have conversations outside of strictly the Bible, strictly Jesus, but we still need to reflect Jesus. And I think Peter in his letter is saying, if we are prepared for three things, really in this section of text, if we are prepared to give an answer for the hope that we have to anyone who asks, if we're prepared in advance to give that, that might be in a situation where we're talking about Jesus, but it also might be in a situation where we're talking about how the 49ers are going to beat the Chiefs today. I don't know. It might be something other than strictly Jesus, and we have an opportunity to reflect Jesus in those conversations. So we have to be prepared to give an answer to people for the hope that we have in Jesus. The second thing, and we need to respond to that with gentleness and respect. And I think if we are prepared for those conversations, if we are prepared to reflect Jesus in whatever conversation we have, we will respond with gentleness and respect. Second, be prepared to suffer like Christ. That's a kind of a scary thing to think about. And I think in America, we really haven't experienced this to the extent that Peter's original intended audience are experiencing. But be prepared to do that, to suffer unjustly, but respond with the same mindset and kingdom focus as Christ. And so his mindset and his kingdom focus was not on him, not on his suffering. He said, as he's hanging on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. His mindset was on them and them getting to the kingdom. And so I think we need to prepare for suffering and have that mindset. And the third thing I think Peter says in this letter is to be prepared to give an answer to God in how you live. I think we're all going to, and Peter says it, that we're all going to stand before God, and we're going to have to give an account at some point. I think I've never been an eyewitness in a testimony or anything like that. Never had to stand up and say, oh, this is what I saw, and this is how it happened, and this is what went down. But if I ever were, I would hope that, my memory would be good, and I would recall the details accurately, and I would give a fair and accurate testimony. And I think as we look at these three things that Peter is calling us to be prepared for, like our fair and accurate testimony starts when we talk to other people and when we tell them why we have this hope in Jesus. But I think it's going to continue when we stand before God and we have to respond. We have to give an account for how we lived our life. Like, did we live in holiness, like Peter is calling us to do? Did we live set apart from the world, or did we live as part of the world? And so those are the three things that we're going to discuss today, just going through this part of the letter. And here's what I want to remind you. The leader of the country, the leader of those folks, for us, we have a different leader, and we will eventually have a different leader. We'll one of two people will be our president. Neither of them are Nero, which is a crazy thing to think about because that's who is over them. The Emperor Nero, who set out to crucify Christians, to behead Christians, to impale Christians with a spear, to light Christians alive on fire and burn them as candles in his garden. That's who was their leader. And so, keeping that in mind as we go through this, let's start with our text, beginning in 1 Peter 3, starting in verse 13. Who is going to harm you if you are eager to do good? I think Peter is telling us, I think they're already looking out for harm. They already know that's going to happen, but Peter is encouraging them. Look, who do good, do right by God. Seek God's will and do good, and who's going to harm you? Well, one probably think, I can think of a few people off the top of my head. Probably not hard. Like, I got some people who might harm me for doing good. They were probably the same way. And so he goes on, but even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened. And Peter's saying, look, here's the deal. You have God's grace. You have God's mercy. You are the recipient of God's favor. So whatever you experience in this life, God is going to use it for good, and it ultimately is going to be good. And so trust him. Don't fear those who can't harm your soul, can only harm your body. Fear the one who can harm both body and soul. Fear God. Trust God. Lean in to God and trust him. And I think remembering that ultimately God's got this. Like, it seems crazy for these people right now. Nero's doing this wicked, awful stuff. They're under Roman authority. They don't like it. It's no fun. It's awful. But yet God's in control. Like, whatever happens, God's in control. Do you trust that? And so he's encouraging you have to trust that. Don't fear other things. Fear God. Verse 15, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. In your hearts, always be prepared. Sorry, I don't know what's going on. Always be prepared to revere Christ but in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer. What is it? Revere Christ as Lord. I think maybe most of us get this. I think a lot of people, like, Christ is Lord over the universe. We think like he is Lord over all of that universe. And we understand that. We know that. I think as Christians, we believe that to be true. But yet, I think sometimes we're challenged by the fact that he's Lord over me. Yeah, he's Lord over the universe. But he's also Lord over me. He's Lord over all of our lives, every bit of it. I read a story earlier this week talking about, and I can't remember exactly who it was that had written this, but they had talked about how they had given their life to Christ, like given everything. Like I want to give you everything. But there was one thing that they were really holding back. One thing that for whatever reason they didn't want to give to God, they didn't want to release that, or they were scared, or they just wanted to pursue that. I don't know exactly what the details were, but everything, they had given everything in their life to him except this one thing. And God kept working on it. And it just, and finally, the person said, I finally got to the point, like, God, why is this one little thing so important to you? And I said, God responded, and they heard God say, why is it so important to you? Make him the Lord of your life. Revere him as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer for everyone who asks the reason for the hope that you have. The hope that we have is in Christ, that he is over everything, that he's in everything, that he's working in and through us. And we aren't perfect. We mess up. I don't know about you guys. Sometimes I'm like, I can't do this. I'm not good enough. I'm not qualified. I'm not prepared. I can't do it. But Jesus in us can do all of these things. And so leaning in and trusting him as Lord, honoring him as Lord, and being prepared to give the answer for why you have that hope when someone asks. When these Christians that Peter's writing to are going through persecution, could you imagine this? Just run this. Let's do this scenario here. Nero gets a group of Christians and he brings them to his garden party, and he makes them candles in his garden, and they're lit on fire in his garden to light the garden while alive. They're burning. Like, they have to trust in the hope of Jesus in that moment. As other people, other partygoers mingled, like, what? I can't even, it's so hard for me to even process what that might have looked like. And yet, if they maintained that hope in Jesus, those that were looking had to ask questions like, why are you living this way? Why do you maintain this faith? Why do you continue to proclaim faith in Jesus despite all of this stuff happening to you? It's because we have hope in Jesus, that he is over all. Even the fact that there are Christians burning as candles, or being decapitated or crucified or whatever it might be. Even as we're going through life in America, it's not nearly as extreme as it is in other places. Like when we're going through difficult times, trials of every kind, how do we respond? 49ers aren't doing as well as they should. How do we respond? Like, are our conversations reflecting Christ? And Peter said, we need to be prepared to have that answer, why we have that hope. Why do you have that hope? And I think as we answer that, I answer that in different ways in different conversations. I've had lots of conversations with different people about that hope that I have. There's a short answer. There's a really long answer that's about 52 years, which is how old I am. Like, I know my life. I know me. I know what I've done, and I know what he's done in my life. And I know where I was, and I now know where I am. And so, being prepared for that answer and doing it with gentleness and respect. And again, I think the key to that is being prepared. Verse 16 says, keeping a clear conscience so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. I think for us, and what Peter is saying to these, like, keep your focus on Jesus. Having that clear conscience, it is a focus on Jesus. Yeah, we mess that up. Sometimes we don't always get it right. But man, when we do mess it up, if we turn back around and we keep focusing on Jesus, we have that intention to focus on Jesus, to glorify Jesus. As we do that, then our conscience will be made right. And those people that come against us, like our goal in these conversations and sharing our hope is not to win an argument. Like our goal in this is to win a soul for Christ. And as we do that, if we speak with gentleness and respect, others will see, like, okay, these aren't just words that this person is claiming. Like, it's their life. And through trials, they live it out. Through difficulty, through good times, through bad times, through whatever, it's all about Christ. And that's our focus. Our conscience is clear because our focus is on God. We're doing right by God. And God will convict those as they question us, as we are being persecuted, as we are being challenged for our faith. Those that challenge us, like our goal is to turn their heart to Christ so that he can convict them and bring them to him. Verse 17 says, if it is God's will to suffer for doing good than doing evil. I don't want to suffer. I don't know about you. I don't want to suffer. That does not sound good at all. And here Peter is saying it is better if it is God's will. Sometimes it's God's will that we suffer. And Peter's reflecting back to in chapter 2, he talked in verse 15, chapter 2, he said, for it is God's will that by doing good, you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. In verse 19, he says, it is commendable to endure the pain of unjust suffering because they are conscious of God. We are conscious of God. If we endure pain being conscious of God and that he is good and he's overall and that he will use this good, that is good. It's commendable to God, he says in verse 20. Sometimes it's God's will that we suffer. And I think we're really challenged by that, especially in the comfort of America, in the comfort of our situation and our lives. Suffering seems wrong. I think back, do you remember in John chapter 9, there's this blind man, and he comes up, and the disciples are all asking Jesus, like, hey, why is this guy blind? Is he blind because of his sin, or is it because of his parents' sin? Whose sin caused this guy to be blind? And Jesus says, it's nobody's sin. This man is blind so that the works of God might be displayed in him. That's the purpose. He had been blind his whole life. I imagine being blind would come with some suffering, some challenges, some difficulty, and the purpose was so that God's work might be displayed in him. It's crazy. This guy gets a run around, and they're trying to get Jesus for healing him on the Sabbath, and he's in front of the Pharisees and the religious leaders, and they're questioning him, and then they go to his parents. They're like all of this uproar, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. And the guy says, look, all I know is I was blind, and now I see, and it's because of Jesus. Like that guy. That's all I know. I was blind, and now I'm not. And I think that's our story. That's our testimony. That's our witness. So sometimes we will suffer, and it's God's will. Verse 18, for Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. So I think of suffering, and I haven't experienced maybe a lot of suffering, again, for my faith. But think back to Jesus and what he went through and the suffering that he endured. And so our suffering, these Christians, their suffering was to reflect that of Jesus. He suffered. He was perfect. He was sinless. He did nothing wrong. And yet, he was crucified. He suffered. The righteous for the unrighteous. To bring, Peter says, to bring you to God, to bring us to God. His suffering had a purpose. In fact, it had quite possibly the greatest purpose ever. I think that's I feel like that's a fair statement. Like, if Jesus doesn't suffer, die, and resurrect, we cannot be brought to God. We can't. We'll, no matter how hard I try, no matter how many good things I want to do, no matter how much I want to seek God's will and do what is right, if it weren't for the suffering of Christ, there's no way that I could ever be brought back to God. I could not be redeemed to him without Christ's suffering. So he suffered one time for all. Like sometimes we want to put him back on the cross, I think. Sometimes we're like, oh man, I messed up again. And we get this thought in our head, like Jesus has to suffer over and over again. And we have to go through this over and over. He suffered once for all the sins of the world. And it is done. It is finished. It is over. This is awesome. These next couple of verses are challenging. And we talked in the past couple of weeks, we've talked about wrestling with verses. Peter's, man, he's given some challenging verses in different ways. Challenging to live out. Some challenging to understand what is Peter saying here. Like, what's he really talking about? And so, starting in verse 19, Peter says, 19 and 20, after being made alive, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah, while the ark was being built, only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water. And so now Peter's taken, I don't know, kind of this twist, and it's hard. I found at least 15 different thoughts, views on what these next few passages, like Peter is actually trying to say. And so when I go through and when I plan, when I prepare, like my goal is twofold. One, what is God saying in the original text? What is the Holy Spirit saying through the writer of this text? What did he intend to speak to the original readers? And secondly, what is God saying to us now as a church through this same text? And so as I read through this, it's challenging. What exactly does it mean? Here's my thoughts. Here's what I think. I think what Peter is saying here is Jesus, after he had been crucified, he's resurrected, and he goes and he speaks to imprisoned spirits, I think angelic, demonic spirits, fallen angels. We go back to the time of Noah. He talks about the time of Noah. There was a lot of crazy stuff going on in the time of Noah. Angels were disobedient to God, having relations with women, and it was this crazy time. And the flood comes, and if this is an allusion to Jude 1:6, where they are in imprisonment until the time they are judged. And so I think my impression as I read this, like Peter's talking about these angelic, demonic beings, the spiritual beings that he went and didn't proclaim a second chance to. Hey, you didn't get it right the first time, but I'm going to give you a second opportunity. No, I think he went and he proclaimed his victory over sin, over evil, over death. And he said, Noah tried to tell you. He tried to tell you, and people didn't listen, and it's happened. Now it's happened. This is done. It's over. It's finished. Death has been defeated. And so I think what Jesus is doing is making a proclamation of, I told you it's coming. It's here. And 21 says, in this water, going back to the days of Noah, when Noah and his family were saved on the ark through the water, and this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you also. Not the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a clear conscience towards God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at God's right hand, with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him. So a couple things here on this. I think the ending part helps me solidify why I believe 19 and 20, talking about angelic beings. Like, just look, not only did I overcome this real world that you see, I overcame the spiritual world. And angels now set in submission to him. He is seated on the throne. And so backing up, the water, Noah and his family that were saved through, they weren't saved by the water. Like, the water destroyed. The flood destroyed the earth. And only 8 people were saved, Noah and his family, in the ark. It was the ark that saved them, not the water. And I think Peter's drawing that, he's drawing that comparison, in that we are saved, not baptism doesn't save us by the water. Like, there's nothing special about the water that saves us. We're saved in Christ. And so baptism, as baptized believers, like, that's a symbol of what God has done already in our hearts, in our lives. And so they are saved not by the waters, they're saved in the ark. We are saved not by the waters of baptism, we are saved in Christ. I think 3 things really quick that I want to point out on this. Christ's death is an atoning sacrifice for everyone who believes. Everyone, all time. An atoning sacrifice, meaning, like in the Old Testament, sacrifice after sacrifice after sacrifice, right? People were not allowed, they couldn't get close to God. Like, he was separated. And Jesus, his atoning sacrifice, allowed us to come to God. Secondly, his resurrection and ascension defeated sin and death. and it proclaimed victory over everything in the universe. Angels, authorities, power, victory over everything. Everything will submit to him. And I think because of that, we should proclaim him and our victory in him through baptism as a symbol of what God has done. I love baptisms. They're one of my favorite things because we get to see just an example of what Christ has done in someone's life, just lived out in a few moments of it. It's simple and it's easy, but man, it's so profound the what has actually happened in that person when they go under the water and they die to themselves. They die to sin. They die to this world, and then they are raised just like Christ. They are raised to a new life. And it is in Christ that they are saved. And so we should celebrate him and baptize. And as baptized in baptism and as baptized believers, we have no fear. We can walk in total faith and confidence, trusting that Jesus has overcome everything and he is in control. Going into 1 Peter verse 4. Therefore, what's the therefore? Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourself also in the same attitude, because whoever suffers in the body is done with sin. As a result, they do not live the rest of their earthly lives for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. And so therefore, we're looking at what Christ done, his suffering, what he did for us. And he says to arm yourself. That's kind of a military term that Peter is using. Like, man, gear up. Like, prepare yourself for battle. Like strap on the armor of God and get ready with the exact same attitude that Christ had, that this isn't about me. It's about God, and it's about helping you get to Christ, helping you get to God. As Christ looked at those that were crucifying him, again, it's hard for me to imagine like what that perspective must have been like, but I have to try. I have to effort to be like him. Like, this is how, if we've been reborn into Christ, we are called to live. And that our suffering would be for good, that our suffering would point to God, that any trials and tribulations that we go through, we can point to and reflect Jesus. I think as people endure unjust suffering, they go through trials that aren't really fair, not really right. I think if we can endure those and reflect Christ, point to Jesus in those, I think as we do that, like, God works in us in such a way that it helps us to be stronger for him and to have less desire for sin. Like, actually, suffering helps us to hate sin. Like, that's what's caused the suffering. Ultimately, that's what caused the suffering of Christ. Sin put him on the cross. And as we endure that, it helps us to see, like, there's a purpose greater. There is something in this, if we can reflect the attitude of Christ. Verse 34, you have spent enough time in the past doing what pagans chose to do, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry. They are surprised that you do not join them in their reckless, wild living, and they heap abuse on you. But they will have to give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. And so it shouldn't be a surprise to us that we see people living a life apart from Jesus because they don't know Jesus. Man, our country, our world is full of people who don't know Jesus, who don't really know Jesus, and they live as such. I love how Peter gives two definitive timelines here. In this text, two absolute definitive timelines. The first one is in 4:2. He says, the rest of your life. Like, at this point going forward, like when you've trusted Jesus, you're a new life. You've been reborn. You have a new purpose. Everything is new. And nothing in the past is a part of this new life. it gets us there, but it's gone. And the second one is 4:3. He says, your old life, the past. There's a definitive marking point where we trust Jesus, where we trust Jesus with everything, and we walk forward. And the past is the past. Yeah, it's had its consequences. Things I've done in my past that, man, I wish I had never done. I think of my life before I knew Jesus. Oh my goodness, to think that I'm standing up, I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be. But Jesus. But Jesus. And we're all like that. We have a past. We have things that we've done that we did, and there are people living that life right now, maybe even in here right now, that are living for self, for their sin, for whatever they can get, whatever enjoyment, whatever pleasure, and not living for Jesus. And there's a point. It's a point where you trust Jesus, that hope that you have in Jesus, and you begin to live for him. And Peter draws that line distinctively in this passage. And there will be people around you who are caught off guard when that line hits. When you cross that line and you begin your new life and you start living for Jesus and you're walking that out, there are going to be people who are like, what? What's going on? Who are you? I remember when I was in college, I lived a life not like I should. Definitely not for God. And I remember after Dina and I got married, I can't remember, we've been married 4 years or so, and I would still have, I don't remember exactly what time it happened, but I had a friend who I went to college with, and he never got past that. And there would be random times where he would call me at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Like, I'm married, and I have 2 kids, and I got to get up and go to work in the morning, and he's still living that life. And he wants me to be a part of it, and he doesn't understand why I'm not. And I don't know. I answered a lot of times that I don't know how I feel about that, because then I would be up and I'd be talking, and I really hadn't truly given my life to Christ. I was just trying to get up in the morning to go to work, right? But my life was changing. God was working. I wasn't fully in, but he was moving me there. And eventually one day that friend stopped calling me at 3 o'clock in the morning. We've had conversations not at 3 o'clock in the morning, reflecting what I believe, who I believe God is, why I live my life the way I live. It's a different conversation. And so I think we're going to have to be prepared to have those conversations. We're going to have to be prepared for people to be caught off guard. We're going to have to be prepared for people to be offended. Like, our beliefs sometimes will offend other people. Like, I know we see them and we think that they're good, and they are good, and we're following Christ, but people who don't know Jesus don't see that. They don't think like Christ. They think like the world, and it doesn't make sense to them. And he says, but they will have to give an account, as we all will, to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. God's ready to judge. I think he's just being incredibly patient. He's got a kingdom mindset, and he's waiting, and he's being patient, but he's ready. And they and us and you and me, and we will all have to give an account to God at some point. And my hope, my prayer is that in my conversations, I will reflect Jesus well. Sometimes I'll get to the point where I mess it up, and I get angry or defensive. Man, I just pray that doesn't happen. My goal, my hope is that their heart would come to know Jesus. Verse 6, for this reason, the gospel was preached even to those who are now dead, so that they might be judged according to human standards in regards to the body, but live according to God in regard to the spirit. 6 and 5. 6 ties into 5. For this reason, the gospel was preached. For what reason? Because we're all going to be judged. Like, as someday we will stand before God and we have to give an account. Every one of us will do it. And so Peter says, this is the reason the gospel has been preached. over and over and over again to even those who have passed away. Like, this is why, so that you can be prepared to give an account to God about the way that you lived. Our actions have consequences, both on earth and in heaven. I think back, my life, BC, before Christ, right? Those actions, those things that I did, the way that I lived, had consequences on earth. They affect my relationships with other people, obviously affected my relationship with God. But there is a hope that we can turn to and follow Jesus. And while we don't always get it right and we fall short, like the hope that we ultimately have is our righteousness, our holiness, our set apartness. God sees that through Jesus, through his sacrifice, through his suffering, when we trust and follow him. And so we have to be prepared to give an answer for that hope to anyone who would ask. Man, do you know your story? Have you shared your story? Like, how did you come to know Jesus? What has he done in your life? How has he changed who you are? Tell us about that defining moment where you had the separation of your past to your life now going forward. What does that look like? I know some of you are probably like sitting here thinking, well, maybe it's not that dramatic. Maybe it was a transition. Maybe you grew up in the church and you've always known Jesus and you've lived your life for him and that's just the way it is. And doesn't seem to be this dramatic line. And I think, as I've thought about that and I've heard, students tell that testimony and share that story. And I'm like, man, that's fantastic. Do you know how blessed you are? Like, you've received God's favor if that's you. Because you didn't have to go through some of the trials and tribulations that others had. God didn't save you out of addiction, right? He saved you from addiction. Like, you didn't even have to experience that because you've been blessed by your parents, your church, whatever it might be that got you there. But every one of us, if we're walking with Jesus, we have this point forward that we can share, that we can talk about why we live the way we live. We have to do it with truth, absolute truth, the Word of God, but also with grace, the love of Jesus. We have to be prepared to suffer like Christ, unjustly, to respond with that same mindset and kingdom focus. So I don't know if you have any friends who really don't like your belief or disagree with what you believe in, if you come across any harshness in your conversations. But if so, we should respond with the mindset of Christ. Like, he experienced the ultimate in harshness. He was put to death, and he still responded in love. And so as we're going through that, we have to respond with that same mindset and kingdom focus. And then, are you prepared to give an answer to God for how you lived? Am I prepared for that? Am I going to get it right? I was thinking about that, like, especially this morning. Like, when it comes time, and I'm standing before God or kneeling before God or on my face, whatever that's like, when I have to give an account of my life, I'm going to be tempted to not want to give a very accurate account, I think. Like, but God, I did this and I did that and I did all of these things. I'm going to want to maybe try to justify myself, but I know ultimately, like, I fell short in every way. And we all do. And here's the beauty of this, and it doesn't seem beautiful as I say that, but Christ died for you. When God looks at you, he sees Christ's holiness and righteousness in you. And so I'm going to be prepared to give an account. And yes, my life and the things that I do, all of those things, I'm going to have to live with how I live, if that makes sense, right? And someday I'm going to have to explain that to God. And I want, with all my heart, to say, God, I tried. As a coach, man, the one thing that I want is effort. Give me effort. Try your best. Do your hardest. Have a good attitude. That's what I want as a Christian. Do my best to try to follow Christ with a Christ-like attitude. Can I do that? If I can live that way daily, like, then I'm going to be prepared to have an answer to God. I pray that it matches my story. And so, just in closing, like, I know that our world is crazy. And I know that we're getting close to election time and we're going to vote and we're going to have a new president. And I know that there's a lot of people who feel a lot differently about those things and what that's going to look like. And I look around our world and I don't know. God has changed my heart in a way. When I look at people, when I, even driving by houses, I drive through our neighborhood. There's political signs all over the place, right? There's different things. There's different things that I see. I've had conversations with neighbors. I don't know if they know Jesus, but God has changed my heart to where I want to see all of them to know Jesus, regardless. And so I know there are people that don't have the same hope that we have in Jesus. We have this ultimate hope that He is in control. That God is in control. That we trust that Jesus ascended to the right hand of the throne of the Father, and everything is in submission to Him. And the Christians living in the first century who got this letter from Peter, trying to live it out in their world, had to be really hard. They absolutely had to trust that Jesus was the King, that He was over everything, that Nero was in place because God allowed him to be in place. God used Nero and all of the things that he did in different ways for His good. So as we think about our country, as we think about what's going to happen, man, I encourage you, pray, vote, have biblical convictions for Christ, right? Live in any of your conversations, live out the Word of God. And I don't know what the future holds, but I know who holds it. It's Jesus. It wasn't Nero. It's not Trump or Harris or anyone else. It's Jesus. Whoever our next president is, whatever happens in our country, whatever we go through, Jesus is the King, and He's on the throne. And if we can trust and live that way, He's going to use us even through those challenges, even through those trials, even through whatever persecution might come. Let's pray. Lord, this is hard. I just pray, God, that You would work through each of us, work in us in ways that You would help us to live this out. We're not close to what it was like in the first century for those people, but yet it seems really hard for us. It seems really hard for me. God, so I just pray that You would help us to live this out. Help us, God, to be prepared, that any conversation we have would reflect You, would point to You, would tell the story of what You've done in our life and the hope that we have in You. Lord, I hope that You would prepare our hearts, our minds, our bodies for what the future holds. If that's persecution, we should be prepared to endure it and to trust You that You're going to use it for good. And God, ultimately, I pray that You would help us to live our life in a way that our ultimate account, when we are before You, is a reflection of a life lived for You. We love You. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.